to our members. If you didn't know, we are going to record this session. Something might have just popped up to let you know that. So over the past few weeks, we have been able to be in workshop together to really talk about deep canvassing and introduce it to our membership and individuals interested in the community to really understand a new tool that Western Colorado Alliance is planning to use to engage with residents and voters across the Western Slope to really have new conversations and really form the ability to change hearts and minds through understanding different perspectives and a hope to lead to new outcomes and change outcomes in some of our communities. If you are not aware, oh shoot, we lost the screen. I'm sure that'll come back up. If you've been in some of our workshops over the past few years, we've mentioned deep canvassing as something we've wanted to do for quite a while, but not been able to make happen because we knew that deep canvassing as a tool was still relatively new and we had a lot to learn about it, first of all, but also that it was going to take a lot of intentional time. If we were going to do this, we wanted to make sure that we did it right. And so we've spent the past few years really talking about it and coming back to it as something we knew we needed to do in our communities, but we just weren't quite ready until now, and we are ready. And as we've started to learn about deep canvassing, really the questions have been, who started this? Who's been doing deep canvassing? Where has this work come from? And lots of research has been happening on the organizing end, and just all these pieces suddenly came together. And one of the first places I heard of deep canvassing was through California's Proposition 8 when it passed. And I won't go into detail because I know Steve is going to go into detail for us. And suddenly these folks who just like created the idea of deep canvassing, really put it into practice, honed it, developed it, and have made it the powerful tool that it is now with like statistically valid analysis that shows how powerful deep canvassing is in our communities. Steve is one of those individuals. He's here with us today, and we're just so lucky to have him be able to join us and talk about how deep canvassing has evolved, how it started through the work that he's doing, and help us understand a little bit more how we can implement it into our organization. So Steve is with the New Conversation Initiative, and it's been a pleasure to get to know him over the past few weeks as we've talked about deep canvassing. And I'm looking forward to learning more today and continuing to learn more, because this is going to be an ongoing process of learning, and just so thrilled to have Steve join us to be able to help us along the way. So with that, Steve, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thanks, Jeriel. And thank you, everyone. It's such an honor and a privilege to be here with you all today. My name is, as Jeriel said, Steve, he, him pronouns. I'm calling in from ancestral unceded Chumash and Tongva land in sunny Los Angeles. And I think I just realized I'm wearing the same button-down shirt as I was in my like snazzy little profile picture there. So I think you all now have also learned how many button-down shirts that I own. But it's really a privilege to be here today. Everything that I've gotten to learn about what WCA has done over the last 40 years of your work really makes me feel really excited about all of you and getting to connect with all of you and offer anything of value to the work that you want to do moving forward. And specifically, I just want to say happy birthday. From what I understand, this is 41 years, and you all have been doing incredible grassroots work for a much longer period of time than most grassroots organizations that I'm familiar with manage to stay operational, much less effective and strategic and powerful the way you all have. So it's a giant accomplishment, and I'm glad to get to be even a small part of celebrating that today as well. And part of why I'm excited is that, so deep canvassing, which we're here to talk about, my goal today is to share a little bit about what these words even mean, deep canvassing, what actually is this thing that we call deep canvassing, what does it look like in practice, and then give us all a chance to practice together one of the kind of core, most revolutionary skills of the tactic, which is a different way of being curious about one another and being curious about one another, even across difference or disagreement. And so we're going to do some breakouts and actually practice some curiosity skills. This isn't just going to be me talking to you the whole time, thank goodness. But I did want to share a little bit about this tactic of deep canvassing, where it comes from, because as with WCA, it really is comes from a place of grassroots innovation and power. So, you know, deep canvassing came from a moment of desperation in the LGBTQ rights movement. So as Jeriel referenced, in 2008, right, the same night that Barack Obama was elected president, the people of California voted to revoke the right to marry from same-sex couples. And as a young gay person living in California, for me, that was devastating in a level that I wasn't really prepared for and didn't have a lot of context for to that point in my life. And as a movement, it was shocking because going into that election, 60% of the polling said that we were going to, 60% of the voters in California were polling as being with us, as being in favor of gay marriage. Only 40% of people were saying they would be against us. And then on election day, 54% of people voted against us. So we didn't just lose, we lost by a significant amount. And we lost places like Los Angeles County and a lot of the Bay Area. A majority of people voted against marriage equality. And this wasn't just a blow of a loss in, you know, progressive California. It was the 28th straight loss on marriage equality across the country. It was the 28th straight time it had been voted on, and it had been overturned or rejected by popular vote. And so this really led to kind of a reckoning in our movement, and a reckoning of the need to recognize that there was something going on with a huge number of the people around us, the huge number of the people in our communities, of our fellow voters, that we didn't understand and that we didn't have the ability to affect or impact or do something about. And if we couldn't learn to do something about this barrier, we were never going to win our rights. And so one of the many things that the movement started to do in response to this was an experimental project based in the LA LGBT Center, a program called the Leadership Lab here in Los Angeles, to go and knock on doors in neighborhoods where people had voted against us by overwhelming numbers, and see if we could talk to the folks who voted against us. If we could talk to them, see if there was, if we could be honest with one another. And if we could do that, if there was anything we could do to change their minds and reduce the kind of underlying fears and homophobia and uncertainties that we knew were guiding people's votes. So a very small team of organizers and then a growing team of thousands of volunteers started doing this, just going door to door to see what we could learn about how to have a different conversation than we'd ever tried to have before as a movement. And over time, we started to learn that a lot of the things we thought would work were terrible ideas, right? All of the like talking points and facts and information we wanted to offer were the exact wrong things to be doing. But we also started to learn some things that did work instead, which had a lot more to do with asking people questions and being curious about them and their lives and sharing vulnerably about our own lives. And that set of best practices over time is what has become what we now call deep canvassing, this methodology that really grew out of that grassroots research and development process. So I could talk till I'm blue in the face about what it actually is, but it's much better to show you. I would actually just love to share a video. And it's actually two videos of a volunteer canvasser named Alan having conversations with two different voters about marriage equality in the course of this process. When we were learning how to have these conversations from 2009 to 2011. And you'll see in this video, the first video, Alan makes one set of choices with the voter he's talking to. So he's going to her and he's saying, hey, on a scale of 0 to 10, how do you feel about marriage equality? Where 0 is you're completely against, 10 is you're completely in favor, and 5 is you're totally undecided. How would you vote if we voted on this again? Which is how most deep canvas conversations start. And you'll see in the first conversation, he makes kind of one set of choices with this voter. And in the second conversation, Alan makes a very different set of choices, and it leads to a very different outcome. So as we watch both of these, I would love you to just kind of think and feel free to drop in chat what do you see Alan doing as the canvasser in these conversations? How is he actually using his time and energy as the canvasser? And what impact is that having in this situation, each of these situations, and with each voter? So feel free to kind of respond as we go, and then we're gonna debrief after that a little bit. But let me go ahead and play this. If you have trouble hearing this video, just give me a wave. Let me know if you're having trouble hearing or seeing it.
Where would you put yourself on a scale of 0 to 10?
I'll go for it. I mean,
yeah, like a 10 or?
I would say 10.
Really?
Yeah.
So you don't have any big concerns about it?
No.
Okay.
Vote no on Keynote.
Do you remember that at all?
Yeah.
Or does that change your opinion about it? Are you still a 10? Or?
Well, you know what? That I think teaching the kids that was I think that was not right.
I mean, does that affect how you vote on gay marriage?
Well, I think that what I wouldn't like is to tell my kids,
Yeah.
you know, in school, teach them that it's okay.
So are you still a 10 on gay marriage then?
Yeah.
Okay.
I really believe that a lot of kids are born like that. I really do, and that's not I
Yeah.
mean, that's not their choice.
Yeah.
And that's why I am like.
Yeah, and I didn't realize
You know
until
what I mean?
yeah.
That I really believe. I do believe also that a lot of them are not born like that, and they just, especially.
Well, here's
now.
what I learned when I was
Well,
in college, right?
Like
So
nowadays, you know, teenagers,
Uh-huh.
they just try. Like I've seen and I know, you know, that they try. So it's like, why would you do that? I
Yeah.
don't know. I just.
So like
Things
when I
have
was in
changed.
college, I took a psychology class, and so one of the things that they teach you is what's called the Kinsey scale. Would you vote in favor of gay marriage or against it, or would you be undecided?
I'm undecided.
Okay. What are your? I guess you said conflicted, right?
Yeah.
So
I have a family member who's gay and would like to get married at some point.
okay.
And
Okay.
so for that person, I'm for it. But
Yeah.
I've always grown up not approving of that.
So what is your background in terms of that?
Well, just a very religious family.
I guess you hadn't really thought about it until you had like a family member came out,
Right. Right.
Was this a close family member?
Yes.
Or? Okay. Do you mind if I ask your relation or
It's my son.
your son? Okay.
You know, he's expressed to me that they would like to get married if they could
Okay.
at some point.
Okay. So,
And you know, I just want him to be happy.
yeah. Okay. What's holding you back in terms of your previous upbringing, in terms of like, because maybe there's some things that you were taught as a child that you don't believe now.
Yeah, well,
whether or not
it's forbidden, and that's not God's plan, and that kind of stuff, and that's fine on a general basis, but when it comes to your own family, it's different. And like I said, I love him, and I just want him to be happy, whatever. This is the mother.
That's all.
So,
Mind if I give you a hug?
oh, absolutely.
What's the right place for you on a scale of 0 to 10?
Oh, let's see. Oh, give me an 8.
Okay, so yeah, we give a little round of applause for Alan and his work and his heart that he was putting into those conversations. So yeah, I would be really interested to hear what folks notice. Maybe to start with that first video. Emily, like, what else did folks notice in that first video? Let's start there. About what was Alan doing? What was Alan doing, and what was the impact of what he was doing in the conversation on the voters he was speaking with? Yeah. Andrea, do you want to come off mute and share a little bit about what you noticed there?
Sure.
if the intent was for him to deeply listen and hear the perspective of the woman he was talking to, he was talking over her, as Emily mentioned, but then really just kept trying to talk about when he was in college and wasn't really getting to her concerns and feelings.
Yeah, yeah. He was started teaching her about the Kinsey scale and what he learned and all the information he had in his head. Absolutely. Absolutely. I see other folks noting some chat here. He was trying to educate her. He was trying to teach. He was trying to insert his experience into her answer, right? And he outright interrupted her at a couple points. He was so eager to let her know what he thought would change her mind. Okay, in the second video, what did folks notice Alan doing as the canvasser in that second video? Yeah, Carol, can you say a little bit about what you noticed?
There were moments of silence where he just waited. And I think that can feel uncomfortable if you're not used to doing that. But what it did was it allowed her to take a moment in her own vulnerability to have the courage to then speak. I mean, it seemed like that's what was happening anyway.
Yeah, absolutely, Carol. Yeah, that a lot. What would you say? Have you experienced that in Canvas conversations, or like the difficulty of leaving that silence? Have you experienced that before, and why it's hard for you? Or
I haven't done deep canvassing, but I've done a lot of individual meetings that are kind of an expanded version. I mean, and I just think that thing of listening, it's so counterintuitive to what our society teaches us to do. And yet I also think, and I think we saw it with the woman, I mean, she was really dying to share. Like, people are hungry for someone to listen, to ask, to see, to be seen. People are dying to be seen. But sometimes you have to give people a little bit of time to, gather their courage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so true, Carol. Thank you. And to even be able to know what it is they want to say or what they're feeling, what they want to express. People need space to figure that out sometimes. And I know for me, like, my anxiety comes up and I'm like, oh, I need to fill this space. This is uncomfortable. I need to talk, rather than giving people that silence just to think and be. Yeah, and Kevin, you were pointing, or excuse me, Catherine, could you say a little bit more about what you noticed?
I noticed that he would ask a question to get an answer. So he would sort of lead the conversation to elicit her to respond in a gentle way. I mean, he wasn't pushy. He asked whether she would volunteer the information about who the family member was, and let her talk.
Yeah. And what kind of questions was he asking, would you say? Did you notice anything about that?
It got personal.
Yeah, personal. There were questions about her life, not about her beliefs or her opinions. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, and you're so right that he was leaving. And I think part of what you're pointing to is they were open-ended questions, right?
Yeah.
They weren't questions that had a yes or no answer. They were just like, yeah, tell me more. Who is it in your life? I want to learn more about all of this. Absolutely. Yeah, I see Nick pointing out all the canvassing I've done is getting out the message and getting to the next door. Yeah, that's really getting at kind of the core difference here. And to the point of even going to the doors of people who we think are on our side rather than those who are opposed. That alone is often something we're not doing outside of a deep canvas environment. So lots more to say about this, but let's dig in a little bit more to some of these pieces that we're raising here, because these things that you all are pointing to really form the core of what is deep canvassing, right? So in a traditional canvas, where our primary goal is to get an ID, right? To get to someone's door and get them to say what side they're on. Our side, the other side, maybe undecided. In a deep canvas, our goal is to surface complexity. So to ask on a 0 to 10 scale or a 1 to 10 scale how they feel, which leaves so much room for conflicted feelings and something more complex than just a with us or against us type answer. In a traditional canvas, often we are training ourselves to use a script and deliver a script effectively. In a deep canvas, we're training ourselves to listen and ask questions and exercise all of those skills that you all were just pointing to. In traditional canvas, we're fundamentally at the end of the day trying to deliver a message, right? And in a deep canvas, at the end of the day, our fundamental goal is to be exchanging vulnerable stories with one another first and foremost, rather than landing a point or landing a message. And these are the things that have formed the best practice of this methodology. And just to speak now, so it was able to make a really transformative impact on the marriage equality fight when scaled up to the hands of many volunteers in statewide fights. We started to be able to win elections on marriage equality, not just because of this approach, but in no small part with its help. And since then, we've been examining how deep canvassing can be applied to other techniques and other approaches, other movements, other issues. So beyond same-sex marriage, deep canvassing, we then turned to testing it around transphobia and trans rights, and including trans folks in non-discrimination laws, and found that it could have a really big impact there. And then abortion access and reproductive rights questions. And then immigration issues. How do we incorporate undocumented people in the fabric of our society and give them legal protections and equity and equality? And then candidate persuasion. Can we persuade folks to vote for Trump, for Biden instead of Trump, excuse me, in a big election? And it's now being tested around lots of other issues around criminal justice reform and decarceration and abolition, climate, persuasion around whether to vote at all. So deep canvassing has been, and especially those areas in blue, those main topics, we've run randomized controlled trials to really test the impact that deep canvassing and all these best practices we've described can have at the door. And so outside political scientists have come in to run experiments to really measure, are we actually persuading people? And if so, for how long and to what degree? And consistently, those tests have found that these deep canvas conversations are able to have a very large persuasive impact. So much larger than the kinds of impact that honestly are seen in persuasion in most places in politics or social science. But not just that the impact can be inoculative. So a deep canvas conversation has been shown to be able to vaccinate someone against later exposure to opposition messaging and to fear mongering from the other side. People will be shown actual messages, and TV ads and deep canvassing has been shown to be able to prevent them from falling for it in the future. The kinds of things that we very commonly lose elections to that come from the right. And in addition, the changes that deep canvassing have been shown to be able to make are lasting. So across all of these tests, the persuasive impact, the ways in which people have changed their mind have been found to last for 9 months or even longer, basically as long as researchers have been able to continue studying and measuring the impact of the conversations. And yeah, the impacts have been broad. They've affected both people's choices about whether to vote, in case we're having conversations about that, but also the deeper, how they're going to vote, and also the deeper attitudes and prejudices and really deeply rooted feelings that make up the elections and feed into those elections. So I see one hand up from Robin. Maybe we'll pause here for a quick question before moving on.
Yeah, thanks so much. And it's actually going back to the videos, and I couldn't see it, but I'm listening in. And I wondered if it would be appropriate. I feel like Alan missed a moment when the voters said, you know, when it's my own family, it's different. And I was yearning for Alan to say, and have you ever thought that every gay person is someone's family member? Would that have been too pushy in the deep listening, deep canvassing arena?
I think, you know, I think it's really what we want, what Alan probably wanted that voter to be thinking about, Robin, but I think being able to just let her come to that conclusion herself. And then if we're going to offer something, I think we usually find in a deep canvas, the opportunity is to say, well, here's what it looks like for me as a young gay person, you know, like, here's what it looks like for me as someone who has gay people in my life that I really care about, and to really speak from our experience and let the voters speak from their experience, and then see what that brings us to at the end of the day. So I think it's a great point. And there again, we're not really trying to land the method, the conclusion. We're trying to create the space to exchange those ideas. So it's kind of a both and. And so, and kind of to that point exactly, Robin, like, why is this exchange of stories so impactful, right? Like, what is actually making this make a difference? Why is this something that makes a difference for voters? Why is this something that is worth doing as advocates for social justice, as people who are trying to persuade folks around something? The reason that, you know, the things we've learned over the years and that the science really has come to bear out is that, you know, our political decisions are made up at a deeply emotional level. So it's a myth that when making up our minds about votes or politics, we carefully survey all the available facts and then make the best choice up here in our heads. Like that's just not how it works. What we know is that the reality is that our emotions are far more powerful and are what really make up our minds on tough issues. So our feelings kind of send us in a direction, and then we seek out the information that validates how we already feel. So think about what we saw in that video of Alan's conversation with that second voter. She wasn't wrestling with the facts or statistics or legal questions about marriage equality. She was wrestling with her emotions. And so, you know, persuading with facts doesn't work, which is so often our impulse. And it's so natural, and it's so what Alan was trying to do in that first video. When we try to change someone with facts or information or education, we're basically telling them that what they feel on a deep level is wrong, which is just going to make anyone dig in their heels and reject what we're saying and try to prove, no, what I'm feeling is right. And here's the information I proved it that proves it. And from Fox News, or from this thing I read on the internet, or wherever it may be, or this thing I heard. So if someone's mind is going to change, it's either going to be because their feelings change, or because they're realizing their feelings led them in a different direction than they thought. Because most of us, most of the time, we don't purely feel one thing or another. We feel kind of a mess of complicated, contradictory emotions that carry us in multiple directions at once, right? Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance, which means that changing our minds isn't like flipping a light switch, where one minute we believe one thing and the next minute everything suddenly looks different and we think the opposite. Changing our minds is really about being on a journey through a wilderness of complicated feelings and emotions. And, you know, the best thing we can do when someone's doing in that place is stand next to them and kind of invite them to open up their map, right? The map of this emotional wilderness that they are in the middle of, and give them a chance to look at it fully and assess where they are and where they've been and where they want to go next. And the way we do that is through stories, right? Because someone talking about their stories is how they're able to talk about, here's where I've been, here's how it felt, and here's what I'm realizing that means about where I want to go next. And so this process of opening up a voter's map and looking at it with them isn't automatic, right? Like most people, most of us, we're afraid to admit that we have complicated feelings. It's uncomfortable, or we're afraid of sounding stupid, or we don't think that our feelings and experiences should matter, that like the information is more important, even though for us it actually does matter more. So it takes us saying, hey, it really does matter what you've experienced, and it's okay if those things are complicated. And I'm really interested in hearing about that, right? To Carol's point, that is a gift we can give someone, to say that these things you are wrestling with matter and I care about them. So like Alan in that video saying, you know, the things you learned growing up about gay people are important to me, and it's okay to talk about them, and I'm interested in hearing more. But also your feelings about your gay son now are also important. and okay to talk about. And I want to hear more about that too. So like deep canvassing is really like creating an opportunity where we can look at someone's emotional map together and actually take out that magnifying glass and look at some of the stuff on their map more closely. And that process is the key skill of deep canvassing, the skill of curiosity, right? Because being curious about someone else is how we're able to keep the conversation focused on the personal instead of on facts and debate, and also how we're able to hold up that magnifying glass. So this skill of curiosity is the thing that I would most love folks to think about and practice as you contemplate this work, and also just in a lot of places in our work. Succeeding at it in a deep canvas is a two-step process. Step one is that we have to ask the questions on the script, right? A deep canvas script is mostly questions, not things we're saying to people. Asking the questions on the script, and then listening for the hints that a voter has a story to share about something, because they're very rarely going to just tell us their story. Most of the time, people are just going to drop hints in passing that they have a story about something without actually telling it. And then step two, once we've like noticed that someone's kind of hinting they have a story, is to dig deeper and make sure that they tell us the whole story, to hold up that magnifying glass and say, hey, let's zoom in on what really happened there and how you felt and how you feel about it now, the same way that Alan did in that second video, because that's what gives people the chance to really reflect on their experiences in new ways. And oops, I skipped the most important slide. There we go. And so the way we do this, the way we dig deeper, is this tool called the cone of curiosity. That's what we can use when we hear this hint that there's a story. It's our step-by-step guide to actually unearthing someone's story and then digging into the feelings underneath it. So when someone in deep canvassing makes a reference to something that sounds like a story, our first step is to stop and say, oh, tell me more about that, to signal that we're interested. And then we want to ask specific open-ended questions to pull out more details of the story. Who was this? How did you know them? What happened? When was this? Where was this? Just like we want the voter to paint a picture for us of the experience that they've had. And then we don't want to stop there. We want to ask, how did that feel? And in this case of the conversation that Alan had, he didn't have to ask how it felt, because as someone was just saying, that it just kind of welled up out of her, right? As soon as she got the opportunity to really sit and look at it, the feeling kind of burst forth. But that's not always going to be the case. Sometimes it's really up to us to ask someone, how did this feel for you? And then we still want to go one step deeper still and ask why. Why did it feel that way? And kind of take the risk of asking that question to really get someone to process the things that they're experiencing. So that's the skill of curiosity. And I would love us to take a chance to practice this skill with one another, to go into breakout rooms and pair up and try having conversations. In this case, I love to have us practice conversations with something that's very current and alive in our culture and maybe in your communities. I don't know what it looks like in Western Colorado right now, but it's something that's under a lot of conversation across the country, which is public safety and policing. And how do we feel about our system of policing right now? And wherever we come down about that, right, we have a lot of space to be curious with one another's experiences and stories about that issue. And so I'm interested in us being curious, asking questions from a deep canvas script that we're currently using around this issue of policing and whether we want to invest more in policing in our communities, or invest less in policing and invest in other kinds of resources that will give us the things that we need to thrive and feel safe and feel healthy. And so the questions, we're not going to look at the whole script on this issue, but the questions that drive us are the ones in front of you here. Has there been a time when our system of public safety that's focused on policing made you or people you care about feel unsafe? Or are there ways in which it makes you feel safe? And is there an impact that you've noticed on family or friends or community members? How have you felt about things that you've seen in the news, things that have happened to people in other places in relation to policing? And one way I would encourage you to think about this too is, what are the ways in which, for me, I'm not often someone who feels directly targeted or impacted by police or made unsafe by police because of who I am. But when I think about a lot of people in my life, and even a lot of other people like my father, who is a wealthy white man, but has issues with his mental health and has been arrested for shoplifting and things, but has never actually been treated for any of his issues. he's just been kind of kicked out, back into the world because he's a wealthy white man, and no one ever has seen fit to say that, oh, this is actually something, you got something going on here. What kind of help do you need? What kind of resources could you use? Either this in a system where someone is either a threat that needs to be controlled or should be ignored, and those are the two options. What does that mean for us and the people in our lives in a number of different ways? So I would love us to take a minute to be curious about this with one another, and just try asking these questions of one another and seeing what comes out. It's a process of discovering for us too, what comes out when we think about this issue. So we're running a little behind because I've talked too much, but we're maybe gonna take about 4 minutes each to practice being curious with one another. So we're gonna go into a breakout room. One person's gonna practice being a caller, the other person's gonna practice being a voter. Then we're gonna switch off. And when you're the caller, you're gonna ask these questions that I just kind of pointed to, and we're actually there's a workshop that we should be dropping in chat, or excuse me, a worksheet that we're dropping in chat that you can open up that has these questions on it that you can use as the questions to get started. Just ask the questions on the worksheet about this issue and start to see what comes up for your partner. And when you hear a hint that they might have a story about something, use that cone of curiosity tool that's also on the worksheet to dig deeper into that story and just find out more about what's going on for your partner around this experience and their feelings around this issue. And so we're going to ask you to use the full 4 minutes to dig into your partner's experiences. If 4 minutes aren't up and you're done talking, that means you haven't been curious enough. There's way more to dig in. Usually we do this for 6 minutes, not 4 minutes. So you're getting off easy in terms of your curiosity. And when you're playing the voter, be yourself. You don't have to pretend to be someone you're not. You're just going to answer with your own feelings and experiences, no matter where that takes you. But don't be like yourself in that. Don't give away your story too easily. So if you realize you have an experience to share, be more like a voter would be at the door, where you're, not going to just share it all at once, even if it's someone you know and trust, as opposed to a stranger at the door. And so, yeah, let's give this a shot. I haven't had the chat open. Great, yeah, all right. So there's a lot going on here around similar tools around this, but yeah, so let's go ahead and jump in our breakouts. We'll start a timer. We'll message you when it's time to switch and take 4 minutes each, and then take 2 minutes at the end after you've each had a chance to practice the skill. Take 2 minutes to just kind of share about how that went and give your partner feedback and let them know, hey, this, there was a bit more to my story here, and maybe if you'd asked this question, you could have gotten to it. Or, hey, this question you asked totally took me to a place I wasn't expecting. That was really powerful for me. And give each other just feedback and thoughts about the process. So with that, I will let us head into our breakout rooms.
Steve, just really quick before I open the breakout rooms, I'm sorry, can you tell me the total length of time you would like it to be open?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I just switched that up last minute. Let's have it open for 10 minutes. So everyone takes 4 minutes each, and then we'll take 2 minutes to debrief at the end. Smiles. I see some, oh, that didn't take long enough. I know, there's never enough time. Thank you all for diving right in and giving that a try on an issue that, you didn't come prepared to talk about today. You got to experience what it's like to do this as a voter who isn't prepared to necessarily be processing this stuff, when we bring it to them. So I'm super interested to hear a little bit about how it went. And I also noticed during our break that there's an interesting set of questions in chat about, well, are we sharing how we feel and what side we're on or not, or how does that fit into persuasion versus listening? And I would love to dig into that too. But I would love to just start with inviting folks to share what that experience was like just now. What was the experience like trying to be curious with someone else and kind of do this sort of listening? And or what was the experience like having someone be curious about you? What did you find yourself feeling? How did you find yourself reacting? So yeah, feel free to drop any thoughts about either of those in chat, what it was like to try to be curious, what it was like to try to listen and dig deeper, or what it was like to have someone being curious about you. And if anyone wants to come off mute on this piece in particular before we move to some of the bigger questions, feel free to just speak up.
Yeah, this is Charlie Allen. I felt like when I was the canvasser, I deviated some from the questions because of the way that Bill was answering, but
Right.
I found out, I heard him say that he had been in a park law enforcement officer, U.S. Park Services law enforcement. And I just didn't pursue that enough. I didn't try to get it from his perspective as much.
Yeah.
It was a great opportunity because he was really doing his role right. He was trying to force me to pull things out. So he gave me that opening, but I didn't step through the door.
Yeah. What do you think? So what do you think that was about in the moment? Why didn't you?
Because I was too anxious to get on with the script. You know, I had this set of questions I needed to ask, and I was just there was enough anxiety about, let's go, let's get this, you know, I've got to go.
Yeah.
And not giving it enough time. So I think this is helpful for me because I'm going around getting a petition signed right now, and it's very helpful to answer. I have some hardcore people out here to get to sign petitions.
Yeah, well, even if we're not doing a quote unquote deep canvas, this skill is really valuable. Absolutely. But and what you're describing, Charlie, is so universal, right? Like for me, I know for everyone who starts doing this work, that kind of the anxiety and what it does to our nervous system when we're in the moment, and the need to get through, like, we don't want to go out there without a script that's kind of a roadmap for a conversation, but then we get too focused on the script as like, we have to get through this script, that we miss exactly the kind of opportunity you're talking about. But hey, you just had your first deep canvas curiosity attempt, and now you've learned the kind of thing that you might miss, and you're going to be one step more likely to hear it the next conversation you're in about a petition or whatever else, you know? So that's great. Thanks for sharing that. You're only coming up as guest in Zoom, but whoever said his questions made me want to talk. Can you share a little bit more about what your experience was there? If you're able to come off mute, valued guest.
That was me.
Great.
Oops. Okay. And I just noticed that when Kevin asked me some questions, I really wanted to start talking about this experience, which, you know, happened a couple of years ago. It was not a big thing, but it really made me want to talk about it and talk about how I felt in a larger sense. I felt safe myself, but it brought out other ways that I don't feel safe and don't trust police. And just my strong sense of privilege as a white woman, I can get away with stuff. Not that I do, I mean, I don't do things, but I feel like I'm never going to be targeted by a policeman. But then again, maybe I could, maybe I would step over some little line. Anyway, it made me want to talk more, and it made me think about the ways that I don't feel safe, even though I was talking about a situation where I did.
I so appreciate that, you sharing that. And yeah, that's the goal, right? That's you looking at your map and saying, oh, I had an experience and I have complicated feelings about it. What are the ways in which I felt safe? What are the ways in which I might feel unsafe? You know, what is that, kind of unpacking that? And you weren't expecting to talk about that today, but suddenly your partner gave you the opportunity to do that and see what came up. And like, that's the gift we're able to give people. And that's what we're learning persuasion actually is people being able to unpack those for themselves on an emotional level, not an intellectual level. So thank you. And we only have a few minutes left, and I do want to make sure to address, there was this kind of a strain of questions happening in the chat earlier that I missed about, well, is it persuasion or listening if we're saying what side we're on? And what about people who are like really strongly on the other side, and how are they going to react? And actually, so one thing that the deep canvas scripts ask us to do is actually start off by saying, hey, we're here to talk to you about this. How do you feel about this issue? Where do you fall on a 0 to 10 scale? But then after we've gotten their answer and given them a chance to process what's on both sides, kind of on an intellectual level at the beginning, kind of taking their survey, then most deep canvas scripts ask us to say, well, so my name's Steve, I'm a volunteer again. And, I'm actually a 10 on this scale. But I'm out here today because I want to have conversations with everyone, no matter what they think, because we aren't able to do that often enough. So it actually asks us to identify where we stand on the issue, as opposed to kind of maintaining that neutrality. And the reason that's actually proven really important and powerful is that we actually want to have this conversation in the context of where we do disagree, right? Like the power of us listening to someone else when they know that we disagree with them is actually much greater than just if we're some neutral survey taker doing a good job of listening, right? Like the power of us being vulnerable about where we stand and how we feel, but still listening non-judgmentally to how they stand, where they stand and how they feel, is actually like where a lot of the juice and energy of this comes from. So that's that, and so which is all just also to say that not every person is going to prove to be a worthy deep canvas conversation. To the question someone asked, there are people who are just going to be so strident and stringent, and they're already so deeply entrenched in their point of view, and they're not willing to talk about anything personal. We do train ourselves in preparing to deep canvas. There's a whole training process to cut those conversations short and not spend time with folks like that. And also folks that we don't feel comfortable with, we don't feel comfortable being vulnerable with. We train ourselves not to spend time in those folks too. So it's not a matter of going out and changing the most hardcore of opponent. It's a matter of talking to folks who are wrestling with conflicted feelings. And honestly, those folks tend to dramatically outnumber the hardcore, most entrenched opponents. So I see Phil and asking, I would ask them before I revealed to me where they do think I stand on the scale. Yeah, exactly. Like asking them where they are on the scale and then giving them a chance to say, and asking why and what's on both sides for you. We do that unpacking, and then we say, well, here's where I am. And so now let's talk about stories. Let's talk about, I'm curious to know what you've experienced and seen in your life. And let me share also about what I've experienced and seen in my life, and see where that takes us, and kind of take the fears and concerns they may have named at the top and just set them on a shelf and put them aside, and maybe come back at the end after we've really shared on a personal level. So there's so much more to say about this. You all are asking such great questions about small groups and clipboards, and we don't have time to go into it all. I want to make sure to end on time here, but there's a lot more to say about all of those things. I will quickly end us with a quote that I love that's about curiosity in particular, right? And about listening, which listening is not merely not talking. You can listen like a blank wall, or like a splendid auditorium where every sound comes back fuller and richer. And that's, I would argue, the gift that we're able to give people in a deep canvas by being curious and listening to them is actually not so much what, we're able to make an impact by talking about ourselves and our own stories, and that's important, but it's so also important what we're reflecting back to them about their own experiences and giving them that space. Yeah, I'm happy to stay on. I don't know what happens next in the agenda, so I'm trying to stay out of the way, but I'm happy to stay on to answer some of these questions folks are asking and take more time to talk about this, but I want to make sure or to follow up in other ways. But at this moment, I'll pause, and Jerry, I'll say, thank you, everyone. I know it was really fast, but you dove in and we did it together. There's lots more to say, and it's been a real treat to talk about it with you all.
Steve, thank you so much. If we could give a round of applause or a round of reactions to Steve. Just thank you so much for joining us today. I think if you're available and you'd like to stay on and answer questions in the chat, perhaps if folks would like to keep asking questions, the last little bit I will say is just that this is a learning process for us all. And it's the reason why we wanted to make sure to leave so much time and space for it. So at the end of this month, I'll be going to a Train the Trainers event that's a part of in network with the organization that Steve runs. And so I will be growing my own leadership and understanding of this work. And then we're going to be bringing it back to our membership over and over and over again, because you all are so instrumental in making this work. And so we will absolutely continue this conversation. If you have questions, please send them to me. I'll put my email address in the chat, and I will connect with Steve in a way that doesn't bombard him with questions, but maybe start to, just create a list that we can come back to Steve with in the future. And maybe Steve would like to come back with us in the next few months ahead too, if we have a continuation that we'd like to continue our work with him. I think I would absolutely welcome it. So thank you all. This is the fastest hour I've ever experienced. So I'm going to turn it over to Emily now. But again, Steve, just thank you so much. And we are going to continue this conversation.
Actually going to ping it straight back to Andrea to close us out.
Absolutely. Thank you again so much, Steve, and to everybody here on this call joining us today, for spending your time with us, for showing up authentically, sharing vulnerability in some of the breakout sessions, and just lending your very careful approach to all of the conversations and things we discussed today. So I really appreciate that. Is together that we will advance the things that we care about and work on together. So thank you again for that. I did want to offer an evaluation tool at the end. We are always interested to see what you think of our time together, and how we may be able to do it in the future in a way that best serves our members and attendees. So thank you very much again for your time today, for Steve and Emily, who are willing to stay on another minute or two, for anyone that has additional questions. And I'll again just point to the evaluation. I think it's going to be coming up in the chat soon. And I'll put in a quick request that everyone take a minute to let us know how we did today. Thanks again. And with that, I'll officially close our meeting and give the goodbye wave to those that need to go. Thanks again.
Thank you, Andrea. So I guess we can just open up the floor to questions for Steve, for any folks who want to stick around and kind of listen into that.
I'll start. Steve, I'm Betsy, and I'm wondering, the caller put in, does a clipboard impede conversation?
I would say no. Every deep canvas conversation I've ever had I've had a clipboard in my hand. I don't know what I would do without it, because we do need that roadmap of a script of, okay, I'm trying to have an organic conversation, but I need a starting point, for what questions I'm asking and kind of some structure. And so, we can talk a little bit about clipboard management, and many of you have probably canvassed a lot and have different tips and tricks you use with your clipboard. But in general, it's part of that same piece where we're not trying to hide that, we have a desire, we have a want, we're with an advocacy group, we have an outcome that we believe in and it's really important to us. That's actually part of what makes this powerful is if we can listen and be non-judgmental, even within that context. That actually adds to our superpower. So I would say the clipboard for me is part of that, if that makes sense. I don't know if that gets at the question a bit. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, Steve, Charlie Allen again.
Yeah.
The reason I asked about the petitioning piece is that I was shocked at the number of people that when I was addressing the candidates' belief, that came out and said, well, what does he think about critical race theory? I mean, I had out of the 50 people that I've talked to, I probably had 10 who asked about that question when we're really working on an educational, and that's what their concern was, is that it's being taught in public schools.
Yeah.
Now, my first reaction was, don't be an idiot. So stop worrying about that. But I didn't say that, but it was hard not to, and it was hard not to. I did ask, well, so I closed the petition and I said, well, why are you concerned about that? But, I didn't get into depth with them. I probably should have, but I don't know where I would have taken it from there. And that was one of the reasons I asked about the petition issue.
Well, yeah, Charlie, I mean, we kind of made reference to this about the ability, a deep canvas conversation has to inoculate people against fear messaging from the opposition. And, again, the moment it came from was a moment where, if you look at the marriage equality fight, right, every voter in California going into the election in Prop 8 had seen a TV ad 20 to 40 times before they voted, saying that if gay marriage were to remain legal, it would be taught to children in schools, and that would pose some danger to children in schools. And that just opened up this whole world of like fears and concerns for a lot of, generally even supportive people and conflicted people. And, it brings up a lot for people. And it's absolutely no coincidence that we're talking about critical race theory and what Black Lives Matter is going to teach kids in schools. And like, that's something that the right is really trying to turn the screws on right now. It's not a coincidence that it's about kids and it's about schools again. It's the same playbook, which is really like, kids and what kids learn is just it taps a deeply emotional thing for everyone. And so when they want to instill fear and have that guide someone, so you're pointing to, like, this is part of the reason deep canvassing exists, was so that we could go and unpack this fear with people and then vaccinate people against it. As for what to do in this moment right now, we're working with one team of folks at an organization who are trying to figure out how to have conversations around critical race theory specifically. We're very early in the learning, but I think there's a really important deep canvas conversation to be had around that, to really figure out how to unpack that fear for folks and how to move people through it out to a different place, So I think you did the exact right thing, Charlie, by not saying you're an idiot, even though that is my, when people were saying, my kid is going to learn this in school, right? When I first started deep canvassing, my reaction was, you're an idiot. Like, it actually has nothing to do with what's taught in schools. Like, absolutely. But I had to really learn to get over that reaction and realize that they're not an idiot, and this is all very real for them, but I don't have a perfect, because part of deep canvassing is you also like understand what stories to share that are going to help move someone through. And we just don't know that yet. So I think what you can think about as you're doing the petitioning is, how do you feel about that issue of critical race theory? Where does it take you when you react to it emotionally? What sense do you make it? What life experiences have you had that make you feel not concerned about it? And how can you share from that? How can you give them a chance to talk about that on a personal level, what their kids may have learned in schools, that they feel really good about, and why you feel like what people are trying to teach about race in this country right now fits in more into that paradigm than something scary and new, and what your experience is like that teaches you that. Maybe there's something to try there to have that conversation, but it's also a lot. It's a lot to take on. And I don't know if it's, if you can put all that on yourself to unpack all this and learn how to do it all on your own in the petition gathering you're doing. But if you're feeling the desire to lean into it, that is how I would recommend maybe experimenting a little and seeing what comes up for folks, and seeing if there's any ability to kind of even just dull the edge of the fear they're feeling and make a case for your candidate after having done so.
Yeah, there's also a lot of myths about critical race theory. You might explore with the person you're speaking with, what do they know about critical race theory? And, try to get to the bottom of things that way.
Yeah, I mean, Betsy, I think there's a little bit of like demythologizing or, to do there, but there again, we're in the space of like kind of knowledge and facts about critical race theory. And that's not as much in the level of life experience too. So that is there's probably an important role for that, but it's kind of a both and, like, how can we also get them grounded in like what they learned in school, and what their kids have learned in school, and how this is actually played out in real life, as opposed to this theoretical thing, because critical race theory is a theoretical thing for most people that are talking about it right now. Most people don't even know what they're speaking about, to your point. It's kind of this Rorschach test that people can project anything onto, and rather than saying it's this, no it's this, no it's this, bringing it back to like the life experience piece may help too. Yeah, Emily, I see Emily's hand up, and then I see David with a question in chat, so maybe we'll go in that order.
Hi, Stephen. I'm Emily. I'm one of the staff members here. And
Yes.
Gariel might have discussed this with you a little bit, but I haven't had a chance to ask this question to folks who've worked this technique before. And it comes up a lot from a couple of our folks who have done more traditional organizing cycles, who really see like these as a bunch of one-on-one conversations on the doors, but kind of truncated. And so I'm just curious, like, what are your thoughts in terms of like seeing deep canvassing as a technique, like that's like connected to a deeper organizing cycle, and like what's similar and what's different in some regards?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's such a great question, and really within again, where deep canvassing sprang from was from an LGBTQ movement place where there was a very strong organizing tradition, and it is just something that we had applied with one another and folks that were already on our side. So really the innovation of deep canvassing was applying a lot of the same, folks have spoken to us in a couple of different ways tonight, applying the same things we might do in a one-to-one meeting, or when speaking with a supporter, to speaking with people who don't already agree with us. Like, really that's the key difference. Is it's many of the same tools and approaches that and yeah, the same tools that we use in other spaces applied to folks who are experiencing emotional conflict about something, or who are, you know, are leaning away from us, as opposed to applying it to the folks who are already with us but just need to be activated or moved into action, or you know, moved into power in a different way. So, you know, I think in terms of thinking of it as like a truncated one-to-one at the door, absolutely. Like there's a lot of value in approaching it that way. And I think, you know, having a deep Canvas script that's designed to, you know, go out and recruit someone to join as a member in the organization, or to step up and take action on an issue that they already care about, that's kind of I guess normally we try to recommend that folks focus on doing one or the other, right? And it's partly the universe you're picking and where you're targeting, you know, like you want to be getting in front of the people that you most need to have either a conversation where you're moving people through their conflict, or you're mobilizing supporters, and it kind of depends on who you're targeting. But when we're trying to mobilize, you know, a lot of us, and train ourselves to do it, like having kind of one clear goal on a given day or at a given canvas that we're pursuing, and that we could really engineer a whole conversation around, is really important, because a lot of this is so overwhelming when we're trying to do it. But both of those tracks are really powerful and worthwhile and valuable. I don't know if I made any sense just now. I rambled a little bit.
No, I think that was helpful. And it's like some things that I kind of like intuitively was guessing. But I think we're also still trying, like, we see this tool, like we want to learn it and use it. And I think we're still trying to understand, like, how are we going to deploy that in like a meaningful way in the coming year. So thank you for giving some of your thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, and just, you know, what we've had to do every time we've started a deep Canvas project is really get clear on, you know, what is the larger strategy this is sitting within, you know, like what are we actually trying to change through deep canvassing and or by other means? And then what is the behavior change we need to see in a subset of voters that will move us towards that strategy? And then what is the emotional barrier, emotional conflict we need to move people through in order for them to change their behavior in that way, whether it's about voting differently on an issue or signing a petition they wouldn't have signed otherwise, you know. And so deep canvassing is for situations where there is an emotional conflict, or there is an emotional barrier we need to move people through in order for them to change their behavior, in order to impact the strategy we're pursuing, you know, like, but not everything needs to be a deep canvas. Like sometimes you don't need to move people through an emotional conflict or barrier, and there are lots of other ways that we should approach them instead. But yeah, being really clear on kind of that, like that, how the methodology is impacting a behavior change, and then the strategy is vital. And it could be like the emotional conflict is around whether to vote, you know, like folks that are really deeply out of the electorate because of how the system has treated them, or because of, you know, any who having an emotional conflict around that, right? Like that could be a conflict that's worth moving people through in order to get them out to vote, have them join the electorate in a more consistent way. And so it's not always this kind of ideological opposition spectrum we're trying to move people through, but it is some kind of difference in an emotional conflict, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Steve,
apologies for my long-winded answers. Yeah, Arn, go for it.
We had a workshop earlier this week that Joel led, where we brought people from the community that we don't normally hear from together, and questions were asked largely in the deep canvassing model. And the first three questions, you know, we saw almost exactly what we saw in Alan's video. One of our panelists actually got emotional, and it made me emotional. And but the final question was more like what I think people are experiencing when they go canvas, which is, what is your opinion? And all we got was regurgitated Fox News talking points. And I just wanted to draw the distinction. I see that, like, what we should have probably done, we didn't have time, but what we probably should have done was to pursue those Fox News answers till we got to the personal life story that was really driving them, because I'm sure all of us have gotten nothing but Fox talking points thrown in our faces many, many times. But we rarely hear the personal life story behind that. So I just wanted to draw that distinction for people who are still struggling with how is this persuasive.
Yeah, no, Arn, I mean, you're getting at something really key about the methodology that you're kind of, sorting through here. And so actually, what I would say that we have found in deep canvassing is that, and it would make more sense when you have a script in front of you, you can kind of see how it flows. So apologies if this is more concrete, and I can share example scripts if you're interested. But we do often have to start with the opinion. It's kind of a sequencing thing. Like we actually need to say at the front, well, not what side are you on or the other, but 0 to 10 scale, where do you fall? And then tell me more about what pulls you in both directions. And often what we get is a lot of the Fox News talking points, like right up front, like the Democrats are doing this and this happens this and blah, blah, whatever the issue is, and then sometimes people just need to like be able to say it out loud and kind of burn it off and kind of burn off some of the heat that they're feeling about how some liberal's needs to hear this or is gonna, react, and just kind of say it out loud and then see what happens. And then when we don't freak out, when we don't panic and say, no, this is why you're wrong, and this is what, MSNBC says, blah, blah, blah. And we just say, all right, well, okay, gotcha. I understand what you're saying. And, just so you know, here's where I am. I'm on the other side of this issue, but I'm really interested to talk to you anyway about it because we don't learn how to do that very often. We don't figure it out. So I'd actually love to hear about, your life experience around this. So have you ever had X happen in your life? So we basically start with the opinion, make sure to get it out in the open, and then kind of put it up on a shelf. We're going to come back to that later. I'm not dismissing it. I'm not telling you you're wrong, but I'm also not going to get into a debate about it. We're not going to get into it. We're going to put it up on a shelf and we're going to talk about our lives, and we're going to see where that takes us and spend most of our time there. And then maybe at the end, we're going to say, okay, so, I hear you saying up front, you had these big concerns, but also you've shared this about this person you care about. What do you do with that? Like, how do you feel about those two things that you're holding? And kind of give people a chance to say, well, this or that, or here's where I come down. And then we kind of are able to make our case and like say, look, for me, I feel about it this way. And, I've learned this and this, or this is the impact on my life. This makes this feel really important to me. And I just want to be honest with you about why I feel the way I feel. And we speak our truth and we don't hold back, about what we really think. And we can offer some facts to back it up, but only after we've been through that personal process. So do you see how it's important to do that and let it get out in the open, but then really redirect. It's on us to redirect to the personal. And that's kind of the structure of a deep canvas conversation.
I like your metaphor of burning it off. That is what it feels like.
Yeah. And there are some people who they have so much to burn off that we could send there all day with it. They're like an oil rig in the Gulf, right? Like they're going to be burning off for years if we stand them and let them do it. And there's just too much there. It's not worth it. It's just going to be endless ranting. And we just have to say, hey, really appreciate your time. I'm going to move on now, and most deep canvas scripts help us differentiate when we're on that path and just need to politely extricate ourselves. But it's a question of finding the folks who have a little bit to burn off, but then are willing to go somewhere different. Yeah. I see a couple hands up. Maybe I have until the half hour, if that works.
I was going to ask Steve where you were at, and then
Yeah. Just full disclosure, I'm getting ready to get on a plane tomorrow for the first time since the pandemic. So I have to go tend to my husband and all of our packing and anxiety about travel needs. But it's really been a treat to be here with y'all. Otherwise I would stay longer, but I see Al, your hand's been up.
Be strong, Steve.
Thanks, Betsy.
Passionate progressives tend to be, in my experience, very preachy, very indignant, and often come across as downright condescending. I firmly believe that's what got Trump elected. And if we're going to be training people to do this technique, I don't think a lot of those people even see that in themselves. And I think one of the first steps in training people to do this technique is to get them to see that in themselves and how to not let it show through. We tend to be our own worst enemy, and we assume people are idiots because they vote differently than us, and it shows when we interact with those people often. So I think an important part of our training is to recognize that in ourselves.
Yeah, Al, I really agree. I mean, right, it's both for us, right? We are both driven by real experiences and deep needs that we have. And yes, a lot of times I know I, as a progressive, am guilty of thinking that I just know more than them. And if they just knew what I knew, if they were just as educated as I was, or if they had the information I was, or they were listening to the right news sources like I am, then they would think the same way that I do, you know, and can absolutely capable of approaching folks from such a condescending place as a progressive. I think you're really right on. And that's part of why the training, you know, there was even just today that little slide about how facts don't change people's minds and how they just further entrench folks. Like, that's kind of one of the small ways in which we train to deprogram ourselves, to not try to educate people, but actually be curious about them and share about our life experience, when the parts we're sharing about our lives vulnerably, not about what we know that they don't know, right? So that we're not Alan in that first video saying, oh, well, here's why I learned the Kinsey scale in college, and that means that this feeling you have about your cousin is wrong, you know? So yeah, Alan, just, it's a big part of the process. And part of what research about deep canvassing has shown is that it actually is able to change our sense of the people that we're talking to. And change our sense of how our feelings about them, how we can relate to them or can't, you know, it's an important part of the process.
Awesome. I might jump in and help wrap us up, Steve, because I think that's
Sure.
a great note to end on. And I know there's like lots of questions that we could all sit and keep talking about. And I just want to say, we're going to be doing more in-depth workshops between like now and the fall. You know, I think we're still kind of honing in, or excuse me, now in the winter. And we're still kind of like honing in a little bit in exactly how we want to deploy this, but I think it is geared towards that bigger goal of just getting more people active in civil discourse. Then, you know, we skipped over this part earlier in the business meeting, y'all, but when we like did our power analysis and like really looked at voting trends in our areas after the 2022 or 2020 elections, you know, if we're going to change congressional district 3, like the truth is we just need different people participating in the system, because we can like all argue out, you know, the Republicans and Democrats can both like fight over the unaffiliated voters as much as they want. And we haven't seen our margins move in like several different election cycles. And so I think like we're thinking both, one, we want to learn on the doors, you know, have the transformative relationship experience of a relational conversation on doors with people who we don't talk to all the time. And so we are looking at doing that like in the spring, and then going back in the 2022 midterms and seeing if we can use what we learned to engage people to just even get out and vote, and see if we can move like a bigger demographic of people to participating in voting. So that's kind of what we're thinking right now. But like we want to invite people to having these conversations with us about learning this tool and what we can do with it. So stay tuned for more, and we'll have lots more discussions in the coming months. And just thank you, Steve, for your time. And thank you all for your time and interest as always. And may you all have a good rest of your weekend and a safe flight, Steve.
Thank you. And I just want to chime in with what you were saying, Emily, like the roadmap that Jeriel shared a little bit with me about what you all are on in terms of starting with that listening and learning, I think is really, really wise and really worthwhile, because to the point I think Charlie was making earlier about, oh, this is coming up with the petitions, I don't know how to handle this. Like, it really starts with learning about what's going on for the people around us, whether they're people who are, you know, on our side but not voting, or people who are disagree with whatever, like doing that deeper learning and listening. So I'm very grateful and excited to hear you all are going to be launching into that and grounding in that work, and just want to say good luck, and I hope we can be supportive as you go. But thanks for having me today, and thank you, Emily, for the work you all are doing, and for, yeah, just really excited.